Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's just dive right into this. I want you to think about the human heart, not just as an organ, but as this beautifully balanced, tirelessly working mechanical pump. It's literally the core engine of a vast, closed-loop plumbing system inside you. And, like any highly tuned mechanical system, its survival relies on absolute precision. So today, we're going to explore exactly what happens when that perfectly balanced pump suddenly breaks down, and how the body's desperate attempts to save itself can actually become its own worst enemy.
To really understand the failure, we've got to first establish the baseline stakes. And it all comes down to this one crucial giant number, 5 liters. Under normal resting conditions, a healthy adult heart pumps exactly 5 liters of blood per minute out into the body. That's, roughly 2.5 large soda bottles every single minute. And this isn't just an average. It's the absolute critical threshold required to maintain normal fluid balance and keep your tissues oxygenated and alive. Literally everything your circulatory system does is aimed at maintaining this exact output.
We call that 5 liters per minute our cardiac output. The math is pretty simple. It's stroke volume, so the amount of blood pumped out per beat, multiplied by your heart rate. But what actually dictates how much blood the heart can pump per beat? Well, this brilliantly illustrates something called the Frank-Starling mechanism. It's basically a law of the heart stating that the force of contraction is directly proportional to how much the muscle is stretched by incoming blood. So the venous return, that's the blood flowing back into the heart, perfectly stretches and primes those muscle fibers for the very next beat. More blood coming in means a stronger stretch and a harder squeeze pushing it right back out. It's honestly a flawless, built-in autoregulation system.
Part 1. When the pump fails. Acute cardiac damage.
So what happens when that pump fails? Imagine an acute event, like a sudden heart attack. A portion of the heart muscle is instantly starved of oxygen and damaged. Boom! Suddenly, the heart's pumping ability is severely depressed and the mechanics are broken. If we look at the top curve here, that's our normal 5 liters per minute at point A. But immediately after the heart is damaged, the curve just plummets down to the bottom line, hitting point B. We're talking a matter of seconds, and cardiac output drops from 5 liters a minute down to just 2 liters. At this dangerously low level, blood begins damming up in the right atrium and the veins, skyrocketing your venous pressure. Honestly, 2 liters a minute is barely enough to sustain life for a few hours, and you're highly likely to faint almost immediately. The entire system is basically crashing.
Part 2. The body's backup plan. Rapid compensation. The body literally has mere seconds to react to this catastrophic drop in pressure. It can't just wait around for the heart to heal, right? It has to frantically initiate physiological counterattacks right now to save the system. Think of this rapid-fire defense like a massive systemic adrenaline shot. Within seconds, a mechanism called the baroreceptor reflex detects this precarious drop in arterial pressure. This instantly fires up the sympathetic nervous system. The normal parasympathetic signals, the ones that usually tell the heart to relax, are completely inhibited. Instead, sympathetic stimulation hammers the heart, forcing whatever undamaged muscle is left to pump way harder. At the same time, it severely constricts your veins. This raises your systemic filling pressure, forcefully shoving all that dammed-up venous blood back into the heart to stretch it and prime it for a stronger beat. And the wild part? This entire rescue mission happens in just about 30 seconds.
If we watch how this builds over time, that initial sympathetic response gets us from the terrifying point B up to a slightly safer point C, giving us about 4.2 liters per minute. Better, but not quite enough. Over the next few days and weeks, a prolonged semi-chronic state kicks in. Because cardiac output is still a bit low, the kidneys step up to the plate. They drastically reduce urine output to hoard salt and water. Now, this retained fluid increases your total blood volume, which pushes even more venous return into the damaged heart. By forcing the heart to stretch more, the cardiac output is finally muscled back up to the normal 5-liter resting level at point D.
And this brings us to a really fascinating physiological crossroads. What we just described is called compensated heart failure. The body has found a stable but highly fragile new balance. At rest, the person might actually feel totally fine, but their heart is operating near its absolute maximum capacity just to maintain that baseline. Their cardiac reserve is severely reduced, meaning if they try to exercise, acute failure symptoms return instantly. On the flip side, though, we have decompensated heart failure. And this is the fatal downward spiral that happens when the heart is just too damaged to ever reach that stable balance.
So the crucial question is this: What happens if the pump is so severely damaged that absolutely no amount of sympathetic adrenaline or extra fluid volume can force it back to that critical 5-liter mark? I mean, just imagine the internal plumbing when the heart simply cannot handle another drop of fluid, but the body just keeps shoving more in.
Part 3. The tipping point, a deadly trap.
This is the exact moment the body's well-intentioned survival mechanisms officially turn into a deadly trap. Notice that straight horizontal line at 5 liters per minute. As we talked about, that is the critical cardiac output level required for the kidneys to establish normal fluid balance. In decompensated heart failure, we start at point A, drop down, and then slowly climb to B, C, D, and E. But here's the kicker. The curve never actually crosses that 5-liter line. Because the output stays low, the kidneys effectively get tricked. They think the body is still bleeding out or dehydrated. So what do? They relentlessly retain more and more fluid day after day. But since the heart is already at its absolute maximum capacity, this excess fluid doesn't help at all. It just overstretches the heart muscle until it becomes edematose and completely fails, dropping the output all the way down to a fatal point F.
The consequences of this vicious cycle are, quite frankly, horrifying. The extreme excess fluid vastly increases the workload on an already dying pump. The rising pressure in the left side of the heart backs up directly into your pulmonary circulation. Once the pressure in the lung capillaries gets too high, fluid actually begins filtering out of the blood and straight into the air spaces of the lungs. This causes pulmonary edema. Clinically, doctors hear this as bubbling rales, which is literally a crackling sound of fluid in the lungs, and the patient experiences severe dyspnea, or intense air hunger. The patient is effectively drowning from the inside out. Without immediate intervention, the cardiovascular system rapidly deteriorates into cardiogenic shock, a state that carries a survival rate of less than 30%.
Part 4. Reversing the damage, stopping the cycle. It's an incredibly grim picture, but thankfully this is exactly where modern medical science steps in to break the vicious cycle. We basically have 2 massive problems we need to solve here: extreme excess fluid and a severely weakened pump. To tackle the fluid overload, doctors administer diuretic drugs and restrict salt intake. This forces the kidneys to dump all that excess water, which reestablishes a safe fluid balance and relieves that fatal overstretching of the heart muscle. Then, to tackle the weak pump itself, doctors bring in cardiotonic drugs, like Digitalis, which can actually strengthen the failing myocardium by 50 to 100%. It's a total game changer.
But how exactly does Digitalis pull that off? The cellular mechanics are honestly amazing. In a failing heart muscle, the cells just can't release enough calcium ions to trigger a full, strong contraction. So Digitalis comes in and cleverly inhibits the sodium-potassium pump on the cardiac cell membranes. By doing this, it traps sodium inside the cell. And here is the genius part. Because the cell relies on a sodium gradient to push calcium out, trapping the sodium also traps the calcium inside the muscle fibers. By slightly raising this intracellular calcium level, Digitalis literally forces the failing heart to squeeze harder and pump way more blood.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want you to leave with this thought on the screen. The body's strongest survival instinct can sometimes be the very thing that requires saving. The cardiovascular system is a total marvel of engineering for sure. Its reflexes, like constricting veins and hoarding fluid to boost blood pressure, are evolutionary miracles that have kept our ancestors from bleeding out. But when the pump itself is the actual problem, that very same blind instinct to increase pressure becomes a fatal error. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer. It leaves us with a fascinating and maybe slightly terrifying thought. If our own built-in defenses can push us over the edge, what other physiological survival mechanisms might be quietly working against us right now?